My father shoved my 8-year-old daughter away from the Christmas table. "That seat is for my real grandchild," he snapped. "Get out." She fell hard onto the wooden floor, right in front of everyone. Plates froze midair. Forks hovered. 20 adults watched a child hit the ground, and no one said a word. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. What broke me wasn't the sound of her knee against the floor. It was the silence that followed, the kind that settles when a verdict has already been reached. I helped my daughter up. Her hands shook as she grabbed my sleeve, searching for something solid. I looked around the table at the people who raised me, who taught me what family was supposed to mean. Then I reached into my bag, placed a folder on the table between the cranberry sauce and the lies, and said 4 words that ended everything. "You've been served." My name is Mara Ellison, and for most of my life, I believed that if I stayed quiet enough, nothing truly bad could happen. I believed silence was protection. That belief shattered on Christmas Eve, on the hardwood floor of my parents' dining room, with my daughter's breath knocked out of her lungs. We were at my parents' house in Ridgewood Hills, the kind of gated suburban neighborhood where every lawn looks professionally judged. The house was warm, over-decorated, and aggressively cheerful. Pine-scented candles burned on every surface, trying to mask the tension that lived there year-round. Garland draped the staircase. A porcelain angel watched from the mantel like it was keeping score. I hadn't wanted to come, but Lila, my daughter, had asked 3 days earlier, in that careful voice kids use when they already expect disappointment. "Grandpa will be nicer this year, right?" I told her yes. That was my first mistake. Lila is 8, small for her age, thoughtful in the way children become when they learn early that attention can turn dangerous. She wore the red sweater my mother had mailed us, 2 sizes too small, sleeves riding up her wrists no matter how many times I tugged them down. She kept her hands folded together like she was bracing herself for impact. My younger sister Vanessa was already there when we arrived, glowing as usual, laughter spilling out of her like it had never cost her anything. Her daughter Chloe, 5 years old and golden in every sense, was perched at the head of the table beside my father. That seat. The one everyone treated like it belonged to blood itself. My father, Richard Ellison, ruled the room without raising his voice. He didn't need to. His authority lived in the way people leaned toward him, in the way conversations paused when he cleared his throat. He had that easy confidence of a man who had never been forced to question his own version of events. My mother, Elaine, floated behind him, refilling glasses, smoothing over edges, practicing the art of not seeing. Dinner began like it always did, with jokes sharpened just enough to draw blood if you were paying attention. "Blood's thicker than eggnog," my father said, raising his glass toward Vanessa with a smirk. Vanessa laughed too quickly. My mother smiled too tightly. Lila stared at her plate. I caught her eye and gave her a small nod. "You're okay," it said. "Just get through this." Then came the place cards. Vanessa had insisted on making them herself, glittery and festive, each name written in looping cursive. Lila picked hers up carefully, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. She stood, chair scraping softly against the floor. She wasn't aiming for anything special. She was just following instructions. But the card led her there, to the seat, the one next to my father. I saw his face change before anyone else did. Something dark flickered behind his eyes like a door slamming shut. "That seat is for my real grandchild," he said. The room froze. Lila stopped moving. Her smile vanished, replaced by confusion so pure it hurt to look at. She glanced at me, then back at him, trying to understand what rule she had broken. "Get out," he added. And then he shoved her. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, not soft enough to be accidental. She stumbled. Her foot caught the edge of the rug. Her knee hit the floor with a sound that didn't belong in a room full of Christmas music and expensive china. I don't remember standing up. I remember being there. Lila didn't cry right away. She just looked at me, eyes wide, like she was waiting for me to explain what had just happened. I helped her up, my hands steady even as my chest burned. Her fingers dug into my sleeve, clinging like I might disappear if she let go. I looked around the table. No one moved. No one spoke. That was the moment something in me finally snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because I understood then, this wasn't about one seat. This was about erasure. And they had been practicing it on me my entire life. I reached into my bag and felt the edge of the folder waiting there, heavier than paper had any right to be. I hadn't planned to use it tonight, but my father had made his choice, and so had I. Silence has a sound when you grow up inside it. It's the sound of plates being passed instead of questions being asked, the sound of laughter arriving half a second too late, the sound of adults choosing comfort over truth and calling it peace. That silence followed us out of my parents' house in Ridgewood Hills that night, clinging to the back seat of my car like fog. Lila sat very still beside me, her seatbelt pulled tight across her chest. She pressed her forehead to the window, watching the decorated houses blur past, twinkling lights, inflatable snowmen, glowing reindeer. Everywhere else, Christmas looked gentle. Inside the car, it felt dangerous to breathe too loudly. Her knee was already swelling, the skin flushed and angry. I reached over at a red light and rested my hand on her leg, careful not to hurt her. "I'm sorry," I said automatically. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Lila turned her head slowly. "For what?" The question landed heavier than anything my father had said. "For bringing you," I tried. "For letting—" She shook her head. "I didn't do anything bad." "No," I said, my throat tightening. "You didn't." She hesitated, then asked the question I had been dreading since the moment she hit the floor. "Is it because I'm not real?" I pulled the car over. Not gently, not smoothly. I needed the world to stop moving before I answered that. I turned to face her fully. "Listen to me," I said, making my voice a wall. "You are real. You belong with me. Always." She nodded, but I could tell she was filing the words away instead of believing them. Children who grow up around cruelty learn to store hope carefully, like it might be taken away later. At home, I wrapped her knee in ice and tucked her onto the couch with a blanket and hot cocoa piled high with marshmallows. I put on a Christmas movie she'd watched 100 times before, the kind where families learn lessons quickly and love fixes everything in 90 minutes. She fell asleep halfway through. I didn't. My phone buzzed endlessly on the counter. Missed calls, voicemails, a family group chat exploding with outrage that somehow didn't mention a child being shoved to the floor. Vanessa texted first. "What did you do? Are you trying to ruin Christmas?" My mother left a voicemail that was little more than breath and pleading. "Mara, please, don't do this. Think about what you're tearing apart." My father's message came last. Cold, controlled. "You are not taking anything from this family." I stared at the screen until the words lost meaning. Then I looked at the folder sitting on my kitchen table. I hadn't found it by accident. 2 weeks earlier, Vanessa had asked me to watch Chloe for an hour. "Work call," she'd said, breezy as ever. I agreed because Chloe was 5 and sweet, and because part of me still believed usefulness could buy safety. While Chloe played with dolls, I cleaned up wrapping paper in my parents' living room, the same house where I had learned to be invisible. Vanessa's laptop sat open on the coffee table. Chloe toddled over and flipped it open like she'd done it 100 times before. A password screen appeared. Without hesitation, she typed it in. The screen unlocked. I remember standing there frozen, because children don't know passwords unless they're allowed to. A document popped up immediately, as if the computer had been waiting. A PDF. At the top, in bold letters, was my grandfather's name. I sat down because my body understood the danger before my brain caught up. I didn't read everything. I skimmed. Fast. Focused. Like someone scanning for an exit during a fire. There were headings, legal language, trust, beneficiaries. And then I saw it. My full legal name. Not a nickname. Not an other child. My name. Clean and undeniable, printed in black ink. I took one photo. One. Then I closed the laptop, smiled at Chloe, and turned on cartoons like my world hadn't just cracked open. 3 days later, I sat across from Helen Brooks, a lawyer whose office smelled like coffee and certainty. I slid my phone across the desk. She studied the photo for less than 10 seconds. "If your name is on it," she said calmly, "they don't get to pretend you don't exist." "What if they think—" I started. "Ink beats opinions," she cut in. The folder on my table now contained the first move. Not revenge. Not drama. Accountability. I looked back at Lila sleeping on the couch, her brow furrowed even in dreams, and understood something with painful clarity. I could survive being erased. I would not let them teach my daughter she was disposable. Outside, Christmas lights blinked cheerfully in the dark. Inside, I picked up my phone, silenced it, and began preparing for war. The morning after Christmas felt wrong in the quiet way disasters do. No carols, no wrapping paper. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of Lila's spoon tapping the side of her cereal bowl as she ate without looking up. She didn't ask to go back to her grandparents' house. That told me more than anything else. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, trying to memorize the way she sat. Shoulders slightly hunched, movements careful, like the world might shove her again if she took up too much space. 8 years old, already fluent in shrinking. That was when I understood the cost of waiting. For years, I had told myself that staying quiet was a form of protection. That keeping the peace meant keeping my child safe. But peace, I was learning, only works if everyone agrees to protect the same people. My phone buzzed again. "Vanessa, you embarrassed Dad. You embarrassed all of us." No mention of Lila. No apology. I didn't respond. Instead, I packed a small bag and took Lila to the park near our apartment. The swings were empty, the air sharp with winter cold. She climbed into one and wrapped her hands around the chains, pushing off slowly. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. The question was so small, so careful, it broke something open in my chest. "No," I said, "we're safe." She swung higher, then stopped herself, dragging her feet against the dirt. "Grandpa doesn't like me." "That's about him," I said. "Not you." She nodded, but I could see the doubt settling in anyway. Doubt has a way of rooting itself when adults refuse to pull it out. That afternoon, I met Helen again. She had spread documents across her desk in neat, unforgiving lines. Trust language, dates, distribution summaries. Enough information to confirm what I already felt in my bones. "There should have been 2 beneficiaries," she said, tapping the page. "You and your sister. 50-50. My mouth went dry. "Should have?" Helen slid another paper toward me. "Current balance." The number stared back at me like a joke that wasn't funny. "What happened to the rest?" I asked. Helen didn't soften it. "That's what we're going to ask the court." I drove home in silence, my hands tight on the steering wheel. At every red light, I imagined my father's face when he realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a tantrum. This was paper. Records. Consequences. By evening, the messages shifted. Extended family. Cousins I barely knew. Aunts who had perfected the art of passive concern. "This is between you and your parents. Don't make it public. Families handle things privately. Think about the children." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. They were thinking about the children now? That night, Lila crawled into my bed without asking. She curled into my side, warm and solid and real. "I don't want to go there again," she said quietly. Not a question, a decision. "Okay," I said, kissing the top of her head. "We won't." She relaxed instantly, like her body had been waiting for permission to stop bracing. After she fell asleep, I opened my laptop and reread the documents Helen had sent, line by line, date by date. I followed the trail of money the way you follow footprints after the snow melts. Faint, but unmistakable. There were patterns. New car, down payment, private school tuition. Always timed just months after requests I had made and been denied. Requests for help moving to a safer apartment. Requests for childcare support. Requests that had been dismissed with lectures about responsibility. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, letting the truth settle. This wasn't neglect. It was a choice. 2 days later, Helen filed the petition. A formal request for a full accounting, a motion to freeze further distributions, a demand for transparency. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. The notification went out quietly, the way real consequences often do. My father called that night. I watched the phone ring until it stopped. Then my mother. Then Vanessa. Voicemails piled up, a chorus of panic and outrage and disbelief. They still thought this was a phase, a bluff, a moment I would eventually apologize for. They didn't understand that something fundamental had shifted. When someone puts their hands on your child, pretending stops being an option. I tucked the folder back into my bag, the same place it had been waiting on Christmas Eve. Heavy, steady, certain. If you've ever wondered how ordinary people end up standing their ground after years of silence, this is how it starts. Not with courage, but with refusal. And once you refuse, there's no going back. The first court notice arrived on a Tuesday. Not dramatic, not heavy, just a thin envelope mixed in with grocery coupons and utility bills. Like accountability was something that could be slipped quietly into your life and hoped you wouldn't notice. I noticed. I stood at the kitchen counter, rereading the letter while Lila colored at the table behind me, humming softly to herself. The normalcy of it felt unreal, like the world had split into two versions, and I was standing in both at once. The hearing was scheduled quickly. Emergency preservation, a temporary freeze. The court's way of saying, let's make sure nothing else disappears while we figure out what already has. When I told Helen, she nodded once. That's good, she said. It means the judge is taking this seriously. I didn't feel relief. I felt exposed. News travels fast in families that thrive on control. By the time the date was set, the narrative had already been rewritten without me. Vanessa posted photos online, Chloe smiling in that same chair beside our father, captioned with something breezy about keeping traditions alive. Comments poured in. Hearts. Laughing emojis. People praising family togetherness. I closed the app without responding. At night, I lay awake listening to Lila breathe, my mind replaying memories I'd filed away years ago as not that bad. The time my father laughed when I asked for help after my apartment was broken into. The way my mother avoided my eyes when she said, "We just can't right now." The way Vanessa's life somehow bloomed financially right after every one of those refusals. I had told myself it was coincidence. Now I knew better. The day of the hearing, I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to disappear as little as possible. Neutral colors, flat shoes, hair pulled back. I wanted to look like what I was, a mother asking the court to protect what should never have been stolen. Lila stayed home with a neighbor. She hugged me tightly before I left. "You'll come back, right?" she asked. "Yes," I said immediately. "Always." The courthouse was colder than I expected. Marble floors, high ceilings, the kind of place that makes your voice echo even when you whisper. My parents were already there. Seeing them felt strange, like encountering actors who had stepped out of a play and into real life. My father sat stiffly, jaw tight. My mother stared at her hands. Vanessa avoided looking at me altogether. Their attorney, Margaret Collins, greeted Helen with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She looked confident, relaxed. That scared me more than anger would have. Inside the courtroom, everything moved quickly. Margaret spoke first. She framed the issue as a family misunderstanding. She used words like intent and tradition and assumed understanding. She never said my name unless she had to. Helen stood calmly when it was our turn. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She spoke about documents, signatures, dates, fiduciary duty. She spoke about my name appearing on a legally binding trust. She spoke about the absence of distributions to one listed beneficiary. The judge listened without interrupting. When he finally spoke, his voice was even, unimpressed by emotion, anchored to facts. "I'm granting the motion to freeze," he said. "All records are to be preserved, full accounting to be submitted." My father's jaw clenched. Vanessa finally looked at me, her eyes sharp with something close to fear. Outside the courtroom, the silence returned. But it was different now. It wasn't protective. It was panicked. My mother reached for me. "Mara, please," she said. "We can talk about this." "Through the lawyers," I replied. My father didn't speak. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty there. At home, I made dinner while Lila told me about her day like nothing monumental had happened. She laughed when the pasta stuck together, complained about math homework, asked if we could get a cat someday. Life insisting on continuing. Later that night, Helen called. "They're scrambling," she said. "That's good. It means they weren't prepared for scrutiny." "What happens next?" I asked. "Now," she said. "We follow the paper trail." I hung up and sat at the table, staring at the folder that had started all of this. It didn't feel like power. It felt like responsibility. I was no longer just protecting myself. I was protecting the truth. And once the truth is asked to speak, it rarely stays quiet. Paper arrives slowly when it's trying not to be caught. Helen warned me about that. "They won't send everything at once," she said. "Records trickle in when people are hoping you won't notice what's missing." She was right. The first packet arrived 3 days after the hearing. A thick envelope this time. Bank statements, partial summaries, pages numbered just carefully enough to look complete. I spread them across my kitchen table after Lila went to bed, the way some people lay out puzzle pieces. Highlighter in one hand, pen in the other. At first glance, everything looked reasonable, conservative even. Funds earmarked for family expenses, maintenance, taxes, miscellaneous support. But then I started lining dates up, month by month, year by year. The pattern emerged quietly, the way rot does. Every time I had asked for help, after the break-in, after my rent increased, after Lila's medical bill, there was a withdrawal within weeks, not to me, to Vanessa. Car payment assistance, home renovation loan, reimbursement, private school tuition categorized as educational advancement. I felt my pulse in my throat. They hadn't just ignored me. They had replaced me. I sent scans to Helen with notes in the margins, my handwriting sharp and uneven. She called the next morning. "Good work," she said. "This confirms direction, but we need approvals." "Approvals? Trustees don't move money without authorization," she said. "Someone signed off." The word lingered. Someone. That night, I dreamed of my grandfather. Not the warm version I barely remembered, but a quieter one, standing at the edge of a room, watching things unfold without intervening. I woke with my jaw clenched, and the uneasy feeling that something worse was still waiting. The next batch arrived a week later. This one was messier. Inconsistent formatting. Pages scanned at odd angles. It felt rushed. Helen called me into her office. She laid the documents out carefully, then slid one page toward me. "Look here," she said, tapping a column. "Authorization signatures." My father's name appeared often, sometimes initials, sometimes full signature. Always confident, always bold. And then I swallowed. My mother's name. Not once, multiple times. I stared at the ink like it might rearrange itself if I looked long enough. "She knew," I said. Helen didn't soften her voice. "Yes." The word landed heavier than the numbers ever could. I had built so much of my survival around the idea that my mother was trapped, passive, afraid, a bystander in a system she couldn't control. This document said otherwise. "She approved these distributions," Helen continued, "which means this wasn't negligence. It was participation." I nodded slowly, my hands numb. When I got home, Lila was sitting on the couch drawing. She held up the picture proudly. It was the two of us. Stick figures, holding hands, a line above us labeled home. I smiled, my chest aching. "It's perfect." Later, after she went to bed, my phone buzzed. My mother. I didn't answer. She texted instead. "Your father is very upset. He feels betrayed." I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. He feels betrayed. As if betrayal hadn't been living in my childhood bedroom for decades. As if betrayal hadn't shoved my daughter onto the floor. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted that too. Finally, I put the phone face down and let the silence be mine for once. The next day, Helen filed a supplemental motion. Expanded discovery, full transaction history, trustee removal consideration. That got their attention. My father left a voicemail that night, his voice clipped and controlled. "This has gone far enough," he said. "You don't understand what you're risking." I listened to it once. Then I deleted it. Because I did understand. I understood that this wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. About who got to define reality. About whether my daughter would grow up believing love was conditional. The third hearing was scheduled for the following week. Helen warned me they would escalate. "They'll try to shift focus," she said. "They'll make it personal." "Let them," I replied. That night, as I tucked Lila in, she asked, "Are they still mad at you?" "Yes," I said honestly. She thought about that. "That's okay," she said. "I'm not." Something loosened in my chest. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I slept through the night. Because whatever was coming next, whatever they tried, I was no longer alone. And they were running out of places to hide. The escalation came exactly the way Helen predicted. Quiet at first, then all at once. 3 days before the next hearing, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a copy of a legal response filed by my parents' attorney. The paper smelled faintly of toner and arrogance. I read it standing at the counter while coffee went cold beside me. They weren't denying the trust. They weren't denying the withdrawals. They were denying me. The argument was dressed up in careful language, phrases like questionable paternity, family understanding, and long-standing private arrangements. But the message underneath was blunt and ugly. I might not be my father's daughter, which meant, according to them, I might not deserve anything at all. My hand started shaking halfway through the second page. When Helen called later that morning, her voice was calm, in the way people sound when they've seen this tactic before. "They're desperate," she said. "This is a distraction." "They're dragging my daughter into it," I replied. Again. "Yes," she said gently, "and that tells us everything." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every memory I'd ever questioned came rushing back. The jokes about my hair being different, the way my father never quite claimed me in public, the ease with which he'd dismissed me as a problem instead of a child. All those moments I'd told myself I was imagining. I wasn't. In the morning, I took Lila to school myself instead of letting her walk with the neighbor. She skipped beside me, backpack bouncing, unaware of the storm gathering around her name. Before she went inside, she stopped and looked up at me. "You're still coming to the assembly on Friday, right?" "Yes," I said immediately. She smiled, reassured, and ran off. I stood there for a long moment after she disappeared through the doors, letting the rage settle into something sharper. Resolve. At Helen's office that afternoon, she slid another document across the desk. "They're asking the court to dismiss your petition," she said, "and sanction you for bad faith." "Sanction," I repeated, like I did something wrong. "They want to intimidate you," she said, "and make you react emotionally." I laughed once, quietly. "They trained me not to." Helen's response was swift, clean, devastating. She didn't argue feelings, she argued facts. Ink, dates, signatures. She reminded the court that trusts do not run on rumors, and beneficiaries are not erased by suspicion. She asked the judge to focus on fiduciary duty, not family gossip. When we walked into the courtroom days later, the atmosphere had shifted. My father looked tired. Not angry, tired. Vanessa sat rigidly beside him, her confidence cracked just enough to show fear underneath. My mother stared straight ahead, hands folded like she was bracing for impact. Their attorney spoke first, leaning hard into biology, into implication, into doubt. Helen waited. Then she stood. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "this case is not about DNA. It's about documents." She held up the trust. "My client's name is here, printed, undisputed. Trustees do not get to rewrite legal instruments based on personal discomfort." The judge leaned forward. That was when I knew. Afterward, outside the courtroom, my father finally spoke to me. "You think this makes you strong?" he asked quietly. I met his eyes. No, I said. It makes me done. That night, my phone buzzed nonstop again. Family members resurfacing, opinions suddenly urgent, people who had stayed silent when a child hit the floor now demanding reconciliation. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on the couch beside Lila while she worked on a puzzle, the pieces spread out between us. She frowned in concentration. This one doesn't fit, she said, trying again. Some pieces don't, I replied. And that's okay. She glanced up at me. You always help me finish them. I smiled. That's kind of my job. If you're listening to this story and still here, still following every step of it, then you already understand something important. Real change doesn't happen in explosions. It happens in moments like this, quiet decisions to stop shrinking. I kissed the top of Lila's head and turned off my phone. The hearing was set for the following week, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what they might try next. Because they had already played their cruelest card, and it hadn't worked. The paternity kit arrived like a dare. Plain cardboard. No logo. No return address. Just my name printed neatly on the label, as if whoever sent it wanted to pretend this was routine. It wasn't. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the entry table where I could see it every time I walked past, a silent challenge sitting between grocery bags and school flyers. Helen had warned me. They might try something like this, she'd said. Don't engage. Not for court. Not for them. And I hadn't. Not once. I had let paper speak. I had let ink do the work cruelty couldn't undo. But now the case was shifting toward its end, and the question I'd buried my entire life had crawled out of hiding. That night, after Lila went to bed, I picked up the box. Not because I owed anyone proof, because I was tired of carrying doubt like it was mine to manage. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Swabs, seals, instructions printed in calm, authoritative fonts. My father's sample was already included. That detail made me laugh. Softly, bitterly. He hadn't wanted the truth for clarity. He'd wanted it for control. I followed the steps quickly, without ceremony. No mirrors, no dramatic pauses. I sealed the envelope and dropped it into the outgoing mail like I was returning something defective. Then came the waiting. The hearing date loomed closer, but this weight felt heavier. Not because it would change the outcome, Helen was clear about that, but because it would answer a question my childhood had been built around. In the meantime, life kept insisting on being lived. Lila had a school assembly. She stood on stage with her class, singing slightly off-key, her eyes scanning the crowd until she found me. When she did, she smiled wider, steadier. I clapped until my hands hurt. Afterward, she skipped beside me, swinging our joined hands. Did you see me? I saw you, I said. Every second. That night, she asked, are they still mad? Yes, I said. Are we okay? Yes, I said again, firmer. She accepted that. The way children do when answers finally stop changing. The email came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was folding laundry. I stared at the subject line for a full minute before opening it. Results available. I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slower. Biological match. My knees buckled and I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. The first feeling wasn't relief. It was rage, clean and cold and absolute. Because it meant the cruelty had never been uncertainty. It had been permission. They could have ended this years ago with one test, one conversation, 1 ounce of decency. They didn't want clarity. They wanted leverage. I forwarded the results to my parents and Vanessa without commentary. No explanation. No invitation to respond. Then I blocked every number. The final hearing was 2 days later. This time, the courtroom felt different. Quieter. Settled. Like everyone already knew where things were headed. Their attorney tried once more to pivot, to biology, to family dynamics, to intent. Helen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Trust law is not a referendum on belonging, she said simply. It's a matter of obligation. The judge didn't deliberate long. He ruled in my favor. Full restitution, interest, legal fees, Penalties. The total landed like a verdict written in numbers. Accountability made tangible. I didn't smile. I didn't look at my parents. I just breathed. At home that evening, Lila sat at the table doing homework, her tongue sticking out in concentration. I cooked dinner on autopilot, my hands shaking only when I set the plates down. She looked up. "Are we done now?" "Yes," I said. "We are." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her work. Later, alone in my room, I stared at the empty space where the kit had been. The truth hadn't freed me, but it had closed a door that should never have been open. And tomorrow, I would decide what stayed outside. The ruling didn't end the noise. It changed the pitch. For a few days after the judgment, everything was eerily quiet. No calls, no messages, no relatives suddenly checking in. It was the kind of silence that feels borrowed, like calm weather before something breaks. Then the paperwork started arriving. Not letters this time, notifications, bank acknowledgments, legal confirmations, timelines. Helen explained it over the phone. "They have a deadline," she said. "If they can't pay, assets get liquidated." Assets. The word tasted strange. For years, that house had been presented as untouchable. Legacy. Proof. The physical symbol of my father's authority. Now it was just collateral. Vanessa broke first. She emailed from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line empty, message rambling and uneven. "You didn't have to do this. Dad's health isn't good. We could have figured something out." I stared at the screen, waiting for the part where she mentioned Lila. It never came. I closed the email without responding. My mother showed up a week later. I saw her through the peephole before I opened the door. Standing alone on the walkway, hands clasped together like she was about to ask for forgiveness the way you ask for a favor. Her shoulders looked smaller than I remembered. Lila was at school. Thank God. I opened the door just enough to make it clear this was a conversation, not an invitation. "Mara," she said, her voice already trembling. "Please, I need to talk to you." I didn't move. "Your father's been different," she rushed on. "He's asking about Lila. He wants to see her." I said nothing. "Now that everything's clear," she added. "Now that we know." That word snapped something clean inside me. "Know what?" I asked. She swallowed. "That you're his." I leaned against the doorframe, steadying myself. "You always knew," I said quietly. Her face crumpled. Not theatrically, but with exhaustion. "Before you were born," she said, voice shaking, "I made a mistake. Just once. Your father suspected. I didn't know how to fix it. I thought, if I let things settle, it would pass. And instead, I said, you let him punish me for it." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I thought I deserved it," she whispered. "I didn't think you would." I waited until she finished. Until the words ran out and the silence sat between us, heavy and honest. Then I spoke. "You were my mother whether I was his or not," I said. "And you chose him anyway." She reached for me. I stepped back. "He doesn't get access to my child now because a test says real," I continued. "And you don't get to come back because the story is comfortable again." Her mouth opened, desperate. "We can still be a family." "No," I said gently. "We can't." She left without shouting, without threats. Just the sound of her footsteps fading down the path. That night, Lila asked me a question while I brushed her hair. "Do I have to say sorry to Grandpa?" she asked. My hand stilled. "Sorry for what?" "For making him mad," she said quietly. "For being there." I set the brush down and knelt in front of her so she had to look at me. "No," I said, firm enough to become a rule she could stand on. "You don't apologize for someone else hurting you." Her shoulders relaxed like she'd been carrying that thought around for days. A month later, the house sold. I found out through a notification from Helen, her message brief and factual. Sale completed. Funds transferred. Judgment satisfied. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time after reading it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. When the money finally hit my account, every dollar owed, every penalty added, I didn't celebrate. I paid off what had been weighing us down. I set aside what would secure Lila's future. I closed the rest like a door I didn't plan to open again. They were quiet after that, not dramatic silence. The peaceful kind. The kind where you stop flinching when your phone buzzes, where holidays don't feel like traps, where your child laughs without checking the room first. One evening, as Lila and I washed dishes together, she said, "Our house feels bigger now." I smiled. It didn't change size. She thought about that. "Yeah," she said, "but it feels safer." And for the first time, I understood exactly what we'd gained. Not money, not justice, but space. Time doesn't rush in after a storm. It creeps back in quietly, testing whether it's safe to exist again. The weeks after the house sold passed without incident. No surprise visits, no anonymous emails, no relatives suddenly discovering my number. The absence felt deliberate, like everyone had silently agreed that the story was over and no one wanted to be the one foolish enough to reopen it. I didn't miss them. What I missed, unexpectedly, was the tension. For so long, my body had lived braced for impact, waiting for the next comment, the next dismissal, the next demand to explain myself. When that pressure vanished, it left behind a strange emptiness, like muscles that had forgotten how to relax. Lila adjusted faster than I did. She slept through the night. She laughed louder. She stopped hovering near doorways like she needed to know where the exits were. One afternoon, I realized she hadn't asked about her grandparents in weeks. That realization hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for, not because I wanted them back, but because it confirmed how deeply she'd learned to live without them. One evening, as we folded laundry together, she held up an old sweater, the red one from Christmas. The sleeves were still too short. "Can I give this away?" she asked. I hesitated. "If you want to." She nodded and placed it carefully into the donation pile, like she was completing a task she'd been putting off. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat alone on the couch and let myself think about the aftermath. About what came next when the crisis was no longer loud enough to drown out reflection. Helen called a few days later, not with updates, but closure. "All filings are complete," she said. "There's nothing else pending. This chapter is officially closed." "Thank you," I said, and meant more than the words could carry. After I hung up, I opened the folder one last time. The papers looked smaller now. Ordinary. Just documents. They no longer felt like armor. I thought about my grandfather. The version of him I barely remembered. The man who had written my name into a future my parents tried to erase. I wondered if he'd known how necessary that act would become. I wondered if he'd known it would save more than just me. The following Saturday, Lila asked if we could rearrange her room. "I want my bed over there," she said, pointing, "and my desk by the window." "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "I want to see outside when I'm working." So we moved furniture. We argued about angles. We laughed when the dresser wouldn't fit through the doorway without scraping the wall. At one point, she sat cross-legged on the floor, surveying the mess. "This feels like starting over," she said. "Yes," I replied softly. "It does." That night, as I tucked her in, she asked, "Do you think they think about us?" I considered the question carefully. "Maybe," I said. "But that doesn't matter." "Why not?" "Because they don't get to decide who we are anymore." She seemed satisfied with that. She rolled over, already halfway asleep. I lingered in the doorway longer than usual, watching her breathe, watching peace settle where fear used to live. In the quiet of my own room, I opened my laptop and began making plans. Not reactionary ones, not defensive ones, but hopeful ones. A different apartment, a different schedule. Possibilities that didn't require permission. For the first time, the future felt wide instead of sharp. Not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was waiting to hurt us. And that, I realized, was what freedom actually felt like. 4 months after the judgment, the money finally cleared. Not all at once in some cinematic rush. Just a notification from the bank. Quiet and unremarkable, like the end of a long sentence finally punctuated. I stared at the screen for a moment, waiting to feel something dramatic. I didn't. I felt steady. I paid off what had kept me awake at night for years, the credit cards that had quietly punished survival, the loan that came from choosing safety over pride after the break-in. I set aside what would carry Lila forward: school, emergencies, options, not luxuries, breathing room. Then I closed the laptop. That was it. No speeches, no announcements, no victory laps. The rest of the money sat untouched for a while, not because I didn't know what to do with it, but because I wanted to choose carefully. Money taken from cruelty carries weight. I wanted to spend it on things that felt like repair. We moved in early spring. Nothing extravagant. A small place with big windows and a park across the street. Lila claimed the bedroom with the best light before I even finished unlocking the door. "This one," she said, decisive. "I want the morning sun." She painted her walls pale yellow. I let her choose the color, even when it meant repainting twice. She deserved to make choices that stuck. The first night in the new apartment, we sat on the floor eating takeout because the table hadn't arrived yet. Lila leaned against me, chewing thoughtfully. "Do you think Grandpa misses us?" she asked. I didn't rush the answer. "Maybe," I said. "But missing someone doesn't mean you treated them right." She nodded, absorbing that like it was a fact worth keeping. Then she smiled, bright and unburdened. "I like it here." "So do I said. We built new routines: Saturday pancakes, Sunday walks, homework at the kitchen counter while I cooked dinner. Lila stopped flinching when doors closed too loudly. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. The small changes were the loudest ones. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about the old house, about the way my father used to stand at the head of the table, convinced that silence meant agreement, about my mother smoothing edges she should have broken, about Vanessa inheriting comfort without ever asking who paid for it. They were downsized now, quiet, distant, not dramatic about it, just removed. We were no contact. Not the angry kind, the peaceful kind. The kind where you stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. Where holidays feel like days instead of tests. Where your phone buzzing doesn't make your shoulders rise. One evening, as Lila and I were putting away groceries, she looked up at me and asked, "Are we a real family?" The question didn't hurt anymore. "Yes," I said easily. "We always were." She considered that, then nodded like it settled something deep. "Good," she said, "because I don't want to be anyone else's." Neither did I. On the anniversary of Christmas Eve, we didn't celebrate. We ordered pizza. We watched a movie. We laughed at the parts that weren't funny. We let the night pass like any other. Before bed, Lila hugged me tighter than usual. "Thanks for choosing me," she whispered. I held her close. There was never a choice. If you've stayed with this story until now, it's probably because you recognize something in it. Not the money, not the courtrooms, but the moment when pretending stops working, and protecting what matters becomes the only option left. Stories like this don't end with applause. They end with quieter victories, with kids who sleep through the night, with adults who stop shrinking, with lives that get smaller on the outside and bigger on the inside. Our life isn't perfect. It's honest. And that's enough. I turned off the light and listened to the city settle around us, calm and ordinary and safe. The past didn't follow us here. We didn't bring it. And that, more than anything, is how I know we won.